Evo, tako.
Dear former Ministers of Defense, Mrs. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, Mrs. Radmila Shekerinska, Mr. Matej Tonin, Honorable Mr. Holger Haibach, Your Excellencies, Honorable Members of the National Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's conference organized by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Dr. Janez Evangelist Greg Institute. Almost 10 months ago, it seemed inconceivable that Europe, which had not yet recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, would be confronted with a new crisis. A new decade, which had only just begun, and as such was an important milestone, bringing hope for more peace, stability and prosperity in the world, turned our world upside down with the COVID-19 pandemic. Crisis management has become a new priority. But in February 2022, 2 years after COVID-19, Europe was confronted with a new situation requiring its response to security challenges. Russia's unprovoked and horrific attack on its western neighbor has changed the paradigm that has guided defense policy in Europe for the past 3 decades. Defense investment and how to ensure security is no longer a political taboo, but the subject of every political debate at the highest European and global level. Europe needs to face this new challenge united and coordinated, and existing partnerships need to be upgraded. Strong economic ties and a balanced and coordinated response to new realities are prerequisites for building a strong defense partnership. Some outlines of such partnership are already visible, but I believe that we need an even more ambitious, stronger and faster common approach in order to ensure adequate security and stability for our countries. I am honored to welcome distinguished guests in Ljubljana, the former defense ministers of Germany, Macedonia and Slovenia. And of course, today's conference could not be organized without the support of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, for which I'd like to thank them very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with a thought from former German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, who once said, "Experience is the seed from which wisdom grows." I am sure and believe that your experienced, distinguished guests will sow the good seeds from which will sprout the wisdom to lay the foundations of reliable partnerships that can withstand unpredictable situations and turbulences. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Holger Haibach, the director of the CAS office for Slovenia and Croatia and former member of the German Parliament, to take the floor. Thank you very much for your attention. Mr. Haibach, the floor is yours.
Former ministers, it sounds a little bit hard to understand since I know at least 2 of you for a very long time, but as we just previously talked about, former dignitaries can also be next dignitaries, so you never know what's going to happen in political life. Dignitaries, members of the diplomatic corps, dear guests, dear Jakob, I would like to, on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, welcome you for this conference. I think we have the very rare opportunity to draw on the experience of 3 former ministers of defense who have had their own challenges in their time in office, who have shaped a lot of answers to security challenges within Europe, and maybe perhaps the ones who are best equipped to give us some ideas on how to address the challenge that we are facing now. And it is a challenge, I believe, that has been unexpected. It has not been foreseen, and it challenged us in a way that is hard, or has been hard to imagine, at least for a normal person like me, before the 24th of February this year. If there's anything that comes good out of it, then I think it is that we finally had to reassure ourselves of what are we preparing to do to help a country in need? What are we preparing to do to help those people who fight for independence, for their physical safety, for the sake of their own country, and in the end, let's be honest, are also fighting the fight for us? And to talk about these questions, I think this conference is very important and very timely. And I would like to thank Jakob and the IEC Institute for teaming up with us again. I would like to thank the three former ministers to make themselves available for the discussion. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to the moderator of this whole event. I hope we're going to have a very interesting afternoon, and perhaps, just perhaps, we get some answers of all the questions that have been going on in our minds. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, this will be a third introduction today. My name is Jure Tepina. I'm a journalist who covers defense in Slovenia and go way back with our Minister of Defense. So I will be glorified railway worker today and will be leading this discussion. Russian illegal invasion to Ukraine started the unthinkable war in Europe. Who was expecting that? Nuclear saber-rattling, war crimes, atrocities, attacks on civilian population, women, children. The Battle of Bakhmut today is resembling the Battle of Somme, the Battle of Verdun. The world we knew prior to February 24th this year is no longer here, doesn't exist anymore. World with unhinged Russian dictator is different, but the world started to change a bit earlier before that. Gas streams have been built. Afghanistan was abandoned. Brexit was done. Trump threw a wrench into transatlantic and NATO alliances, relations, and one thing is gone for a foreseeable future. That is predictability. What is the European answer to new security challenges? This is what our topic today is. Can we identify consequences of this war already? What should we do as Europeans so that something like this never happens again? One of those questions. So our guests were already introduced today. We will have discussion for about 60 minutes and then we'll end with Q&A. But first, let's begin with opening remarks. Ms. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, Bundesministerin, the floor is yours.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, lieber Matej.
Thank you very much, dear Matej, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for providing me the chance to be part of this discussion today, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak in German. For me and for you, believe me, it is better than if I would speak in English. February 24th this year has led to the situation that many people have said. New time has arrived, a new reality. But I wouldn't sign that in that form it has been said, no, because February 24th this year, in my opinion, did not appear to be a new threat, no. To us in Germany as well, it just has helped us to see clearly, to see what threat we're living in, because it is a threat to this region. It is a threat to our friends in the Baltic countries, but those Baltic countries have addressed that topic much earlier. They have warned us. They went through that and they realized it much earlier than other countries. I'm talking also about Germany. We didn't understand what was going on. And that is why the first consequence we have to live with in future, the following. We have to think about the different parts of NATO and to listen to them, because each of the region is dealing with their own experiences and their own challenges. And we all together as allies are only as strong as long as we can build up on these experiences. And today it seems impossible, and having in mind the responsibility we have in NATO, it is impossible to think about that, whether NATO is dead today, whether we can be protected by NATO still. Whether we have to react differently and to be agile we in Europe, because we cannot count properly, not any longer on NATO. That was changed by February 24th. If that was the intention of Putin, to keep us away one from each other here in Europe, no, he was completely wrong. But we within NATO and in Europe have become one, much more than we ever have been. But another thing is important that we know. We have to change the way we cooperate within NATO. Still, the guarantee of security is borne by the US side. We all know that. But today we have the chance and the goodwill, I'm speaking on behalf of Germany, we've shown the goodwill to do more together in Europe, to do more as Germans. Not because we want to replace the US in Europe, no, because we know that US has also other interests to present. For example, in Pacific countries, in Asia, for example. And if we, this transatlantic partnership, want to keep alive as a protective pillar here in Europe, then we have to take care of the burden we have to carry on our shoulders. 100 billion euro we are planning in Germany to spend for future defense. And that still is not enough to keep up with what we have missed to spend and to invest in history in our military. But together within Europe, we can do a lot. And I hope, and this has been a lesson learned from the weeks and months during the Russian attack on Ukraine, that well, we are still learning. We have to learn from what we have missed and mistakes made. And we have to learn as NATO from this crisis. We have to learn as Europe and have to become stronger and more united and safer than we ever have been in history. And in that sense, it is necessary to discuss about the future steps, to discuss it there where we represent common interests, but also there where our interests do not go in the same direction. That is something we can do together as partners. We can bear together as partners. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon, which suggestions, which proposals you will share with us this afternoon. Thank you very much to the Foundation, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Me? Oh, yeah. And we continue with Radmila Shekarinska, former defense minister of North Macedonia.
Thank you very much, dear Matej, dear Anna Grete, dear friends. It is interesting to gather former ministers to talk about a present war. But we are all very ambitious about turning this into a former war, while, you know, we can all decide our future regardless. We have been members of the NATO club for the shortest period of time. We are the newest member of the alliance. But let me tell you, as someone who, together with both of my colleagues, has participated at the discussions of defense ministers in the last several years, let me say that most were surprised by what has happened this February. But we cannot claim to say that we couldn't see it coming. And absolutely, you're right. There were voices that were very vocal within the NATO alliance that, especially after 2014, we shouldn't turn a blind eye to Putin's behavior and to Russia's actions. I do believe that everyone, but especially people in the European Union, because of the fact that they have lived through peace and prosperity for too long, I think we have all grown used to democracy and stability being guaranteed. Most people were used to cheap Russian gas, and I have to say also cheap at first sight Chinese loans. And this has made us a bit slow. This has made us complacent. This has made us sometimes less vocal than we should have been in calling certain actions unacceptable. Until 2014, probably we were right in still hoping that Russia will turn a different corner. But let me remind you that since 2010, the strategic concept of NATO actually did not see Russia anymore as a partner. So the signals coming from the intelligence community, coming from the defense experts, were already there. As someone has said, when you deal with dictators, you have to know that no single occupation or no single attack is his last one. There is always new countries to attack. There are always new goals to achieve. And I think that we have probably now not so much the defense sector, but very much the overall political landscape was reluctant to see that certain change is irreversible. There were quite a few initiatives within the European Union, even within NATO, back in 2020, 2021, that we should open up a new dialogue with Russia, all of them well-intended. Maybe some people, especially more to the south or more to the west, when they heard the colleagues from the Baltics, from Poland, some from the Western Balkans, they thought that we are seeing Russia everywhere, and probably that we are over-dramatizing the whole thing. But even those of us who live in this part of world, Southeastern Europe, with some open issues, we were also more sensitive to the fact that Russia has changed. Not in 2014, probably earlier, but that this change is visible in their daily operation in foreign affairs, in how they perceive the region, and in how they deal with countries in our neighborhood. Let me tell you our example from North Macedonia just in few words. When we were elected as a new government, after 11 years being left out of both NATO and EU path, we decided to really change the course of our country. And we said, we will try to solve our problem with Greece, and we will try to reinstate democracy, rule of law, media freedom, in order to give then Macedonia a chance to become NATO member and start accession talks with the European Union. And we were told that Russian officials are very explicit about doing everything they can to prevent our NATO membership. And this is not the Russia of 10 years ago. Because when we applied for NATO the first time, when we expressed our desire for the strategic goal to join the alliance, Russia practically did not care. When Macedonia was still invited to join the NATO alliance prior to the summit in Bucharest, Russia did not object, it did not even comment. They basically abandoned this part of the world. They didn't focus, definitely not on Macedonia. So this was a new reality. And what we have seen during our negotiations with Greece, during the implementation of the agreement that we have concluded with Greece, the so-called Prespa agreement, was that Russia was actively undermining the compromise, both in Greece and back home. And this was not clearly a plan of a status quo power, because at that point of time, Russia was no longer a status quo power. And we have seen this On NATO front, unfortunately, when they failed, and we have managed to become the 30th member of the alliance, we did not see Russia changing its course. We did not see China giving up. They basically transferred to Plan B. And this was, how can we make it more difficult for North Macedonia now to start accession talks with the EU? It is my firm belief that we, especially we who follow a bit their positioning in the region, misread some of the signs, and maybe we did not respond quickly enough in their attention to influence certain Bulgarian politicians, certain Bulgarian power structures, because I firmly believe that they were behind some of the moves on pushing Bulgaria towards yet another veto for EU membership. So, to sum it up, the crisis started earlier. The crisis was not just Russia. The crisis was also this slightly diminished belief that our international order is the right one, that our values, beliefs, and standards are and will be dominant. And I think that many people still fail to see that the Ukrainian war is a de facto European war. And we should not deal with it only from a point of view of solidarity, but we should deal with it as rational individuals and nations who are conscious that if we don't change course, our continent might end up in a much, much bigger crisis. Security becomes a challenge when you misread geopolitical reality. This is the lesson that we learned in former Yugoslavia, especially some of us. This is the lesson that I hope also some people in Russia learned. But I think that this is also a lesson for us even now, because the unity that came as a surprise to Putin especially will continue to be challenged. And I think that as we move forward, we will need to reconvince people that we will fight for our values and for our beliefs, and that the unity that was so strong will also be sustainable. And this is our main goal, both as present for those that are presently active in politics, but also those of us who were active in politics. They say, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, fighting with friends is terrible. We had some fighting among friends within NATO, within EU, but fighting without friends is worse. And I think that this crisis has brought new solidarity and new unity within the alliance. I feel we need to keep the flame alive. Thank you.
Matej Tonin, former Slovenian Minister of Defense and Vice President of our former government.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Annegret, dear Radmila, Your Excellencies, and everybody present here. Maybe somebody asking yourself what former ministers can tell and how they can help to solve the current problems. And I can say that we have something what we didn't have before. This is freedom. That we can say more that we were able to say while we were still having an acting job and we were much more hesitant. And beside all this, I'm very happy that Annegret and Radmila are here. They are very experienced politicians. Annegret is saying that she's an ex-politician, but we will see what will happen in the future. They have many experience and they did a tremendous job. I remember that they were one of my best colleagues from who I learned a lot. Radmila said it's difficult to fight with friends, but it's much more difficult to be without friends. And I can say that as a minister, I had great friends in Annegret and in Radmila. I will never forget that we did some big things for both countries. I can say that we definitely boost the cooperation between Germany and Slovenia. You all know that we always had excellent economic cooperation. But there was some problems maybe in the field of defense, and we boosted it. And the crown jewel of this cooperation was definitely the project Boxer. With Radmila, we joined forces in Latvia, in our eastern flank. Today, Northern Macedonian and Slovenian soldiers work together in Latvia to help reassure our partners in Latvia, and that's definitely something. We established a program Bervo, a nice program after wildfires in Macedonia. So a lot of nice joint stories about which I can talk the whole afternoon, but today we are here because of defense, and the main title was how the Europe in a way changed after the war in Ukraine, and what are the lectures. You all talked how the Europe changed after the war, and I think that we have to raise the question how and in which way we will adapt to this new reality. And I think that we have to do three things. First, we have to build credible and reliable deterrence. Second, we have to prepare our countries and economies on a new, sadly, second Cold War. And third, we have to build new alliances. Deterrence. I think that President Putin and Russia attacked Ukraine because they were absolutely sure that nothing can happen, that there won't be any real reaction, that the European Union will be divided, and this is the time. And that Europe doesn't have, and even Ukraine doesn't have real forces to deter the attack. And that's why my point is that we have to invest in deterrence. And sometimes people are asking us why we invest in armored vehicles, why we invest in army. Because this is a necessary thing to preserve peace. It's always much cheaper to invest in strong deterrence, instead invest in the war. You can see how big are costs of war in Ukraine. We are talking 100, 500, I think that the last number was 600 billion euros is the cost. Can you imagine what kind of deterrence we would build if we would just invest 1/3 of this in deterrence? So I definitely think this is necessary in the future, that Slovenia has a lot of homework still to do, and as well the Europe as a whole. Second thing, Cold War. It's a strong word. I understand, I know, but I read an article in Politico with which I agree that the second Cold War just started. We have three countries which decided to fight in a way against West, and that we have to adjust. And these three countries are Russia, China, and Iran. All three countries in different way. For example, Iran wants to preserve and expand their Islamic revolution. China wants to expand its economic growth and economic strength. And we can see every day what Russia literally and physically is doing in Ukraine. So in a way, we as a countries, we as a Europe, we have to adjust to this reality. And if we are not adjusting fast enough, we will have tremendous problems in the future. Third point, we have to build new alliances. Maybe we are too much focused only on us, Europeans, Northern Americans, and that we simply forgot, for example, on Africa, on India, and other countries are active here. And that's why we have energized our activities with those countries I mean with Africa, with India especially, to build new alliances, and that these new alliances will help us to preserve our Western values. So, Jure, I will conclude here, and then, as you said, we will continue our discussion. And as I said, I'm really happy and proud that you, I can say, my friends, are here. Thank you very much.
So we can begin our discussion. Welcome to the stage as well. I was reporting from Ukraine in the end of February, beginning of March. I was heavily criticized when I came back to Slovenia and declared that Putin already lost the war. But I was alluding to the fact that things did not go according to his plan. Ms. Shekarinska, you were talking about how we cannot claim to be surprised. All the intelligence was there. Only the public and some of politicians were not convinced about this. And I was present for the Battle of Kiev, but what stood out to me was not only the resilience of the first weeks of the war, but the response of Europe. So if we start in Germany, did the unity of Europe, the united response of the Western world, surprised you?
Nein, sie hat.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't surprised, but Putin was surprised. And I believe that Putin was also surprised by the strong response of the Ukraine. Why? Because even the Russian communities in Ukraine, well, have defended themselves and fought against the invasion, and the Europeans didn't just let it happen. No, we all together said, doesn't matter whether we have recognized the situation on time or not, but we said that this is a great challenge and we can provide one answer only towards that. It is not only about the interests of Ukraine, I know it is about an order which represents the basis for Europe and our altogether life in peace. And that is why I was glad that we all were capable to find such a response and such an answer in Europe and in Germany.
Mr. Tonin, you were acting defense minister at the time of the invasion. You had the privilege to see all this first-hand reaction of NATO and European Union. How do you recollect that dramatic weeks and days at that time?
So it was really a surreal experience. I always say that I will always remember 24th of February when they called me from the office that, Minister, the war just started, you should come to the headquarters as soon as possible. The first thing, early in the morning, I didn't know really if I'm dreaming or this is a real situation. In a way, this portrayed what the mentality at that time was. Americans were emphasizing all the time, look, the attack is imminent. It will come soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a week, but it will come. Because they were so much emphasizing this, at the end, probably majority of the ministers didn't believe that this will come true and this will really happen. But in the end, did. And first, we were shocked a little bit. But what I'm proud, that European Union and NATO showed such unity. That was really tremendous, because I'm absolutely sure that Putin was counting that we will be divided. You had many election campaigns, or you had just newly elected government, for example, like in Germany, and he definitely thought this is the time. But after the first shock, after the first wave, we find the strength to stabilize the situation, to find unity, and to answer the Putin. And I think this is the best strength and the best lecture, even for the Putin. So whenever European Union is not in the crisis, we have problems. We have problems to reach an agreement, but when the situation is real, for example, the same happened with the COVID, we needed a month, but after a month we found a solution that we acted jointly. Here with Ukraine was the same story, and I'm really proud European that we were able to show such unity.
Ms. Shekerinska, our former Minister of Defense was talking about those dramatic days, but that war quickly turned into a war of attrition. And also, in opening remarks, you were alluding that we have to reconvince the public that we need to, quote unquote, stay in the fight. Like Mr. Tonin said, there were a lot of elections in Europe, Italy, Germany, Slovenia, but we see this resilience, political resilience and will to continue. But if we're facing long, cold winter, so how do we reconvince our public to, quote unquote, stay in the fight? That's probably one of million-dollar questions and key question of today.
I would have been still the minister more if I knew that. I'm just joking. You know, there is, I think we tend to fall in the trap that, you know, public opinion exists for itself and by itself. And I think it relieves many politicians from their responsibility. I'm a firm believer, yes, institutions are very important, international order is very important, but people shape events to a dramatic sense. I have participated in some of the most dramatic events of my country, some of them even influencing the region, and I can never overemphasize the role that individuals play. So I believe it is not the role of our public. I believe it is the role of our leaders at a European level, at a global level, to keep the fight. And politics is a daily job. I mean, you wake up, you try to do the best, and you try to convince the public that this is the best by talking to them openly. I said the Ukrainian war is a European war. Because if this war of attrition, attack, aggression works, why would Putin or Russia simply sit down and say this is enough? Because autocratic leaders actually need to expand in order to maintain their power even at home. If you analyze the developments in Russia, you will see that actually the war in Ukraine was partially a result of a calculus at home, that they need something to solidify the political support. Putin has discovered, and this is visible in all the wars that they have participated in, that war is excellent for public opinion. You solidify your base, you convince people, you rally everyone around your flag. So if it works once again, where does it end? The Baltics? Should then Germany be relaxed because, you know, there is Poland in between? It's a very short-sighted politics. I was yesterday asked about the latest Eurobarometer and the opinion polls on a non-related issue, but I would consider it also related, and this is enlargement. As a country that has been trying to succeed to the European Union, I have heard too many times that the European public doesn't have an appetite for enlargement. And this was practically the excuse that we have heard in every office, not so much in Brussels, but in many member states. Now the Eurobarometer says that the situation actually has changed, and that even in the more or most skeptical countries, you have more people that are in favor of enlargement than people who oppose enlargement. Do you believe that this is just because people think about enlargement all the time? I don't think so, especially people in Europe. Maybe Macedonians think about it. It's also because the leaders in the European Union are now talking about enlargement as a geopolitical tool to get to stability. And if you try to convince your public, if you're open with them, they do follow, because they really believe that these are arguments. I think that the unity will be challenged, and it won't be a direct road. Some countries will be harmed by this more, but let us analyze the last 30 years. How would have Europe looked now under these security threats if enlargement in Eastern and Central Europe did not take place in 2004? Dramatically different, with security concerns practically on every corner. That used to be the price of non-enlargement. I think we have completely underestimated this. If someone also has had this knowledge now, when we were talking about energy dependency, would we have placed all our eggs in a Russian basket? Of course not. But it was convenient. And sometimes also we politicians choose the path of least resistance. I think this is the main lesson that we have to draw from the war and from the Russian attack, that the path of least resistance is very attractive and sometimes very dangerous.
You gave me so many notes right now. We are talking about enlargement in the Balkans, in southern part, but there's also very good examples of enlargement with Finland and with Sweden. And Finnish Prime Minister, also a young, very assertive Prime Minister who's in the forefront of political opinion fighting with public opinion in Europe and with Russian. She said that the solution to the war is easy, just Putin to leave. But on the other hand, she said also that we rely too much on US. And when Biden came back for the first time to NATO summit, he said the USA is back, and Macron said for how long? So Ms. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, Ms. Shekerinska also said that we put a lot of eggs into Russian gas basket, and Germany was one of the countries that were on the forefront of gas streams building and relying too much on those relations with Russia. How much did that change, and for how long?
Before answering to that question, allow me just to add something to what Radmila just had said. I am deeply convinced that Putin will try to keep this war ongoing as long as possible, because he believes that he will be successful if he stretches this war through the winter, and he wants to keep us apart, us, the countries, or to tear us apart, the countries in Europe, because he knows that we are coping with high energy prices. And that is why it is necessary, along with what we are doing on the military side, to support them with weapons. Also, it is quite necessary for the European states to deal with their inflation rates properly, and to keep up and to strengthen their social commitment. This is also a way of how to cope against the Russian aggression, and that is something we should not forget. We do have a chance at the moment, especially us in Germany, and I'm here very self-critical, because in history we understood energy like something we need, and we had as one of the strongest and most powerful country in the world. And that was also the question that turned to that, how expensive energy is. And even in the most difficult times of the Cold War, we had a good and reliable partner in Russia who provided energy to us. But that situation has changed towards two sides. On one hand, to many people in Germany and Europe, it has become clear how we need to cope and to reply to the energy crisis that we cannot self-understandably count on some energy sources. But another thing we have understood is if we want to remain resilient, then we should not run into a dependent relationship to somebody. And even if it costs you a lot of money, you need to change your energy policy. And that is a very difficult lesson Germany is going through. And it is also a task of the German management and German politics, because all the attempts to resist to that and to find other ways, well, did not succeed. Because at the end, we need a climate policy which is sustainable and which makes much more sense than that we have risked before. As much as the U.S. is concerned, the administration of Joe Biden, well, I'm very grateful to him and his administration because they knew very well what to do in the Ukraine crisis. They are NATO committed and they understand themselves as a part of the security architecture of NATO and Europe. But what we do know is that the U.S., especially if it is about the question and the situation with China, they have other interests beyond Europe, in the Pacific country, for example. And that is why we need to make sure that we, as Europeans, will be capable of coping with security tasks outside of Europe. The US will always remain our strong and reliable partner, but the burdens are not divided the same way at the moment. And I'm convinced if we want to become good partners, balanced partners, then we as Europeans need to do more. And in the defense policy, it means we have to stick together to have a good cooperation relations, to make proper decisions to secure freedom and good life in Europe.
Mr. Tonin, either who wants to comment, you said that this is European war, but a lot of criticism from the public depends on the country, of course, but that this is a U.S. proxy war. And it's just waged on the backs of European people that have to get through very cold winter and high energy prices. How do you comment on that? How do you answer that?
To comment this, if probably you wanted to state it very directly, if Americans are misusing this war in their favor. But we have to return a little bit in the history to answer this question. I think that my generation understood peace as granted. We simply didn't believe that in 21st century war in Europe is possible. And we were wrong. We were simply wrong. And that we have to work every day to preserve peace. And however we look in the history, we discover that the best peace-preserving tool is enlargement of NATO. And now we come to the year 2008, when there was a proposal for Georgia and Ukraine to join NATO. And I was present at the NATO summit with the heads of states. I'm not allowed to talk who said so, but I can say what the narrative was. They were explaining what has happened in 2008. They said they were really, majority of them was in favor to accept Georgia and Ukraine within the NATO. But the most hesitant, the most problematic was not Americans, but Europeans. And at that time, they said, Putin bought additional year. At the dinner with the heads of states, he asked heads of states, can you prolong the decision about Ukraine and Georgia for a year or two? And then you know what has happened. The war in Georgia. And everything just stopped. What I wanted to say is that sometimes we Europeans act strangely. In a way, sometimes I have feeling that Americans want to do more for our security and peace than we ourselves. I will remember the ministerial meeting. Annegret was, I think, that the only one who was, I would say, warning or emphasizing or underlining, asking us if withdrawing from the Afghanistan is the right move, that we should rethink it. And in the end, we discovered that simply without Americans, we don't have capabilities to stay there. So again, problem is on European side. So to answer your question, if Americans are misusing the war, I would say no. No. I think they are doing the best they can, of course, and we cannot blame Americans for our mistakes. And our mistakes is that we always count on Americans, that's first thing. And the second thing, we never build appropriate capabilities to take responsibility on our own. Are Americans to blame? No. I think we have to do simply more.
I agree with Matej, but also we have to go one step further. It is very fashionable to turn everything into a relative truth, relative lie, to start questioning ulterior motives. But as a country that has gone through war, as a country that has suffered because of wars in the neighborhood, we cannot, no one, including the Americans, cannot be guilty for Putin making a decision to enter an independent state that they themselves have also recognized as independent. If you go back to history and you see, you know, the dissolution of former Soviet Union, you know, Ukraine had to give up all their nuclear power, nuclear warfare, in order to get to their independence. That was the guarantee for Russia. But it looks as if every time you make a deal, you can actually be, this deal can be used against you afterwards. So I think, yeah, this is present, very much present, especially in social media, amongst some political parties and politicians, but it is irresponsible, because every time you look at the facts, you will see a different reality. Based on our experience with Afghanistan, our experience with former wars in Yugoslavia, I actually do subscribe to the definition that the United States is, how they say, a reluctant sheriff. But our behavior is a bit bipolar, you know, we expect them to come at someone's rescue, and then we criticize them either for responding or not responding. I do believe that most of the crisis and most of the negative scenarios took place when the United States decided not to react. And as I say, every kind of whataboutism with regards to an attack to a sovereign state leads us to deeper trouble.
Germany and France are so-called pulling train of European decisions to two of the most important nations. And Mr. Tonin was saying we have to develop capabilities. So is it time for a different European defense structures, upgrade or more operational common security defense policy of European Union?
When we took over the presidency of the Council in Europe, we had a trio with Portugal, who were our predecessors, and I didn't understand which country was later. We have worked together to form this, to shape this strategic compass. So it was a joint analysis which was the result. And in that strategic compass, we also have expanded our possibilities, for example, the peace facility and others. And there is no doubt that we have much more in common, that we need a European weapon upgrading agreements. And the weapon industry is a very important industrial branch. We do have international interests, and we have national interests as well. But if you want to work together within Europe, then the workflow is not divided at the same shares or by the same shares. We need to find a way to provide benefit for everybody. But that we have to do it, that it is necessary, that is clear. And this is not, don't mean it's not, I don't speak only in favor of the classic industry, no, because in future we will need tanks, we will need weapons. But what we see at the moment is that the way of warfare in future is hybrid. We need to upgrade our civil structures. We have to be prepared for cyber warfare. We also have seen that the universe, space, is used much more than before. And if we take into account how many of our services do depend on satellites and how simple it is just to knock down one of the satellites, which would be really a disaster for us in Europe, then we understand how huge this challenge is. And no European country can deal with that on its own.
The time is now. How to do it practically?
Exactly. This is the crucial question, and I would just like to add the discussion. President Trump and Afghanistan changed Europeans in a way that we finally realized we have to do something. And we started to develop different mechanisms. Don't forget, we have PESCO, we have a European Peace Facility, you have a European Defense Fund, you have OCCAR, you have many different institutions and mechanisms which can help Europeans to develop appropriate capabilities to join forces. But you know, where is the problem? Money and a political will. That's very simple. Even with the, like Annegret said, we made a great job with the strategic compass. You started, we finished it in a way. Everything is written. How we can, we should build rapid response force response forces. Then what kind of capabilities? Everything is written. But now we have to materialize this. This is the crucial point, and to materialize this, we need political will and money. And now it's the time that we really do what we promised.
But political will should be here in time of war, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the window is closing. Mm-hmm. I mean, immediately after the war in Ukraine or after Russian aggression, there was a big window open for all countries, that people really saw a need for investment in defense. You know, even you media, you kept Ukraine and the war on the front pages. Now this war is moving down the pages, and the window is definitely closing. And why I'm in a way disappointed, I can speak for Slovenia, because everything was set nice, clear way how to finally build capabilities which we promised, and again, government change, and we are at the beginning. We are again counting if this is okay, if it's not. So we need more predictability, we need more continuity, and so on. That's a crucial thing in the defense politics in Europe.
We'll be slowly wrapping up, but you mentioned the defense spending. Germany just announced one of the biggest defense spend budget. The increase, it will take you to the third in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Germany was quite criticized unfairly, in my opinion, to not do enough on a tactical level in sense of the nations. what can we expect in following month from Ringtausch program with cooperation with Macedonia, with Slovenia, who are in this Ringtausch program?
Ich hoffe, dass der Ring
I hope that really something is going to change and that Ukraine will receive systems they need. I personally believe that these changes and just words will not be enough, because they need new tanks. Christoph Heusen has provided a very good example and a very good answer to that, and said that all the countries that produce these tanks should establish a consortium and provide tanks to Ukraine. If we know that Putin intends to win this war by time during this winter, I explained it, and if we understand that, and we at the NATO have decided not to become an active participant in the war, then on the other hand, we need to do all we can to provide possibilities to the Ukrainian army to be as successful as possible. And for that to be achieved, they need the best possible weapons and services. They need tanks. And of course, we need to cut the money flow to Russia, just to prevent them from buying new weapons and ammunition. Well, that is the way of thinking we intend to implement now, but not everybody, not all the partners in NATO have implemented that yet.
Slovenia, can we afford? I know Macedonia donated T-72, Slovenia donated M84s, BVPs. How can Macedonia sustain that?
Well, I think the decision to donate some of our old tanks was actually an example how solidarity and the alliance can work. So we basically gave old equipment that we could not even no longer or planned to use. And then we got significant support from the US in purchasing, in future purchases of modernized equipment fully aligned with NATO standards. So in a way, it was a win-win for all. But what I think is actually our big dilemma is how to balance, you know, the traditional defense spending and investment in equipment, which we have underestimated as an alliance, but in the same time not lose sight of the hybrid warfare, what you have mentioned. Because part of the reason why nobody believed that Putin will attack is because we got also focused on his hybrid style, which required no money, no big risks, and he managed to undermine, you know, practically the international order and especially the European unity. The fact that he opened up a real front does not mean that he forgot the old hybrid front. And I believe that we see his signature throughout the Balkans. I mentioned this with regards to our relationship with Bulgaria, but it's also the fact that the Balkans has been the underbelly of Europe. And we have seen Russia being active there, undermining European solidarity and European one-voice policy, not only with regards to Ukraine, but also with regards to Balkans. How can you solve this discord easily? In open issues: Belgrade, Pristina, Bosnia, North Macedonia. So trying to close down these open issues, trying to deal with the vacuum that is still there, is, I think, an essential part of European reaction, necessary reaction. I heard Ivan Krastev, I think, say the following just a month ago. He said, Putin has lost the war with Ukraine, but Putin might still win the war with Europe. And of course, he did not mean a full-fledged war, but war in terms of undermining European institutions, undermining the sense of alliance, of unity. And I think that one of the areas where Europe can do more in preventive diplomacy, without actually needing to produce more tanks, is the Balkans. And I do see some elements of there, this renewed interest to support a Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, a renewed interest in Bosnia, and hopefully a real accession talks with meaningful outcomes for North Macedonia and Albania.
And Montenegro as well.
Well, Montenegro has been on the course for some time.
Yeah. And one of those is the inability of hybrid warfare. Before I open the floor to questions, Mr. Tunin, your government was the one that started the donation program to Ukraine. Is it time also for Europe to donate more Soviet-style fighter jets? What should we do on a tactical level in Slovenia and in Europe as well?
Probably we cannot imagine how intensive the fight in Ukraine is, but the numbers can talk. I read the report that the amount of ammo used in Ukraine in one day, it's equivalent to those in 1 month in Afghanistan. So this is the magnitude. It's really huge usage of ammo, different type in Ukraine. So the fight is really intense, even though that we don't have the constant report on the news how terrible fight is really going on in Ukraine. It's obviously that Ukraine cannot sustain on their own, clearly, and that we have to support them. Otherwise, the Europe will be the loser of this war. And I agree totally with the statement that with the strength which Ukrainians are showing, that Putin lost the war in Ukraine. Maybe they can continue for 5, 10 years, but there will be a guerrilla fight. Putin cannot win the war in Ukraine, dot. But now is the question, can he win the war for the Europe? And helping Ukraine is actually fighting the war for the Europe. Regarding Slovenia, yeah, we emptied all our strategic reserves. So we gave all our armored personnel carriers, we gave them old Soviet tanks, M55S, so we gave them probably everything what we have. But we are a small nation, and I see, and I saw as well reports that when you check those, let's say, 30 nations from NATO alliance, only 10 countries have still the real strong stocks to support Ukraine. So others, for example, Slovenia and other small countries who will have to support Ukraine in the future with money, that's obviously, that the others who have capabilities and options will support Ukraine with arms, because they are fighting the war for us.
And it leaves us quite naked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I said before, you know, political will and the money. And at least for Slovenia speaking, the money was assured. We have a special law which provides funding for the investments in the military until 2026. So, as I said, we have to materialize, stop calculating, start working.
Dear and esteemed guests, any questions from the audience? Please raise hands. No, we were so informative. No questions. Yes, third row.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the following. Regarding the economic relationship towards war, because Crimea was annexed in 2014. In 2015, we experienced the biggest economic exchange between the US and Russia. So this principle, America first, is nice, but America is not only always positive We know this from history, and the fiscal policy has shown this. And in the economic exchange in 2015, so this was the time when we already had sanctions against Russia in place. So I don't want to highlight the fact that America hasn't done anything. It's quite the contrary. So, and I'm proud that we are part of the NATO alliance and that we have the US as our partner. And America has done a lot for the Ukraine. But Europe should start thinking about this. And as was pointed out by Mr. Tunin, Mr. Trump has warned us that we also have to have an economic vision, because Russia has been blackmailing Europe and has been blackmailing the world. And Russia is a dictatorship which we already saw previously in Chechnya. And back then, when we had the conflict in Chechnya, nobody did anything, except for a couple of journalists. Nobody did a thing. And we didn't introduce any sanctions against Russia. And this allowed Russia to annex certain parts of the territory with the help of the military. Just remember Grozny and remember some other territories that they invaded. And thank you. So your question regards the economic relations.
Germany is one of those that has the biggest net trade with Russia. How would you comment the question? Should we sever the ties? How much ties should we have?
In previous times, of course, we had many relations to Eurasia in our energy sector and beyond. But this question was related also to that the US had such relations to Russia. And among friends and partners, it's possible, and it's supposed to be possible. I want us to understand that we are acting on a level of the same values, but still can represent and implement various interests. And that is why it is important that we in Europe jointly formulate and shape these interests there where they need to be implemented and to represent them as well. For me, it is very important how we cope with the PAC, I believe the lady said PAC company. Many countries have problems with that. And if we want our voices and our interests to remain to be implemented, then we need to use the benefit of a common Europe or a joint Europe. This is something so important for us, and that is what we need to do among friends, but always please being aware of the fact that shared values does not mean that always and in every matter we have the same interests. No, it is quite legitimate to represent different interests.
100% synchronized answer from all over Europe. Hungary, zum Beispiel, has its own policy and will not sever any economical ties with Russia. Do you care to comment on the dissenting voices of Europe?
The dissenting voices in Europe are, like, let's say, standard. You know, if you go back to any, big political crisis, it's impossible to expect that a community of 27 nations will always come to unison easily. But I think that on a more general note, it just stresses the need for internal reform when it comes to especially to common foreign and security policy. And I know that many people associate this with enlargement, and many people say, enlargement countries should accept the fact that maybe when they join, they won't be able to veto certain decisions. I actually don't think that the solution lies there. We would be willing to give it up. I mean, no single country, including Ukraine, is probably aspiring to get into the European Union so that they can veto. That's not on the agenda. But I believe that the internal reform is needed first for the European Union so that it can work, especially in times like this, but also so that the European Union can work and decide effectively even without a crisis. I agree fully with Mate. When the going gets tough, the Europe works. Exactly. The idea is to actually have the same efficiency even before the crisis hits, and then usually the price is lower. So I think generally speaking, we will limit Russia or any other malign actor power to undermine Europe by the internal reform within the European Union, and that will help enlargement, definitely.
We have time for one quick question, so I think we're kind of in timeline. There was first, we have two questions. If we're going to be quick about it, we have time for two.
Thank you. Mr. Robert Schuman said in the past that the EU is a gradual process, and it will realize through materials with concrete action. And we saw that the European Parliament is trying to be the most important player in different fields. But regarding the security challenges, I think that the European Parliament has been lagging behind. So I'd like to ask the following. In the near future, do you see as the European Parliament as a more active player in this field? Thank you. Well, I think that at this European level, everything regarding the vocality, that the European Parliament actually has been very active, and they did a lot, and much more than other European institutions, perhaps. So I personally would not really criticize the European Parliament. And I think that with every new term, the European Parliament is trying to increase its power, and in the long run, it's going to turn into a real parliament. And just a brief comment to the previous questions. Chechnya, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Crimea. So, did anything happen to Putin after he annexed those countries? Nothing. So why wouldn't he try to do the same thing with Ukraine? If he came through with South Ossetia and with Chechnya and so forth, and then nothing happened to him, even though he violated the rights of the minorities, and he violated the rights of minorities in Crimea, and again, nothing happened to him. So he can just continue with that in Ukraine. And this regards the fundamental question whether or not Europe of the 21st century still allows that the its borders can be changed in a bloody way. And I think the answer is only one. And regarding our economic dependence, I have to say that Putin has been working on this for many, many years, not only the last 5 years, because you know, we know that in EU the terms of office are usually 2 or 4 years, whereas in Russia those terms of office have been, 15, 20 years. But then again, I don't want to blame Putin, I don't want to blame the US. We ourselves have to ask ourselves, what can we do so that we can decrease this economic dependence and that we actually start working instead of just talking. And well...
Back row.
Microphone for the speaker. Microphone for the speaker, please.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. So if I could just touch on the observation that Ms. Shekerinska made about the need for the rejuvenation of political will as the conflict drags on. I mean, with all due respect, seeing as we all live in democracies, if the people don't like what you're saying, they can just vote you out. And if we can be realistic, we only have enough energy reserves for one winter. That is this winter. And as the conflict drags on, when the next winter comes, what's the plan after that? And I think there's gonna, increasingly, we've also started seeing indications from the American side about there being a need for at least forming the steps or the precursory steps to start negotiating with Russia. So I would just like to know what your opinion is on that, seeing as Europe might be a bit gung-ho now, whereas America, one of the largest backers of Ukraine in this conflict, is slowly trying to edge away from it.
I don't believe that there is a single person who believes that the war will end with the victory and defeat without negotiations. I don't think that anyone in Europe expects that this will be the case. I don't see a big difference between the US and the EU when it comes to statements. I think that they all agree that at the end of the day, in a certain moment, both sides will sit down and negotiate. And I think both sides, Europe and the US, have been clear that this decision, when to negotiate and generally on what terms, should be a Ukrainian decision and not our decision, because it is very easy to make a decision when other countries' interest and land are at stake. You're right, the people can vote politicians out. But, you know, this happens even without a crisis. We lose elections even when there is no war. It will be up to the leaders to convince. It will be up to the leaders to provide alternative energy sources. But if we surrender under the status quo concept, then next time when we are invaded, you know, it will be the same story. I have no doubts negotiations will happen, but this is the only thing that I have remembered from my time of learning about negotiations. The moment has to be ripe, and the conditions have to be met. We are not the ones that can foresee when this is happening. Otherwise, I just read that this is one of the really long wars according to the history of the last few decades. Usually wars lasted in the last few decades 3 to 4 months. So this has went beyond the expectations, I think, both in Moscow and in our capitals. I don't see the US shying away, although I agree with you that from a point of view of energy, they are in a safer spot. But maybe, if crisis is the only thing that can make us prepare for a worse crisis, then we have to do our share of the work.
Ich würde das gern unterstreichen. Zum einen, glaube ich, müssen wir uns sehr bewusst machen, dass...
I'm sorry. No, the ones who until now have lost the dearest are those from the Ukraine. It is their army. They have to cope with so many victims, neither the Americans nor the Germans. We didn't lose any people there. That is one of the reasons why we should be very cautious when talking about under which conditions we should negotiate. And it could only be negotiated up to the conditions of the Ukraine. And the second point that is important to me, when at the end of that war, only one tiny bit of success there is on the side of Putin, this will encourage him to continue as he already did. And then there will be another country he will attack, just he will probably change the method. Because all the experiences so far with Putin, he will try it as long as he succeeds, and he does it as long as he runs into a wall. We saw that when we tried to get out of the negotiations of the contract related to grains. Do you remember? He continued with the deliveries. There was Turkey involved and Ukraine. So we need to be there very clear. And it is not something that happens once in a time, and we cannot allow to we as politicians understand that it solves something that just happened. No, we need to try to support the military success of the Ukraine, and we may not leave aside the resilience matter as much as it concerns our energy policy. The problem now is to survive this winter, but it is also of utmost importance to live through the next winter, because that matter will not end with the next spring.
For me, it's quite simple. If Ukraine stops fighting, we have capitulation. If Russia stops fighting, we have peace. And I see at least one bright thing in Slovenian politics, that we were able to form a joint statement or a joint position that is our moral duty to support Ukrainians as far as they're willing to fight for their and ours freedom. Definitely this will hurt us as well in economic terms, but as well here I see some bright points at the end of the dark tunnel. If you compare Europe today with Europe a year ago, we made vast changes. And of course, it will be a difficult year 2023, but I'm absolutely sure and confident that we will manage.
Thank you, all of our guests. Thank you for all the good questions. This concludes our event. Thank you, of course, to Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and Institut Dr. Janeza Evangelista Kreka. And thank you, all the guests, for your wisdom and your thoughts today. Let's give them a big round of applause. And thank you very much, everybody.